Agent McKinnon placed the folder on the table, thinking he was offering Bumpy Johnson 3 choices, but the photograph Bumpy held beneath the table proved the agent had just made the biggest mistake of his life. The Lexington Hotel, 12th floor, room 1247. 3 men sitting around a mahogany table that had witnessed more blood than most morgues, but tonight the violence wouldn't come from guns, it would come from words, from secrets, from the kind of betrayal that destroys governments and topples empires. McKinnon didn't know it yet, but he was already dead, not in body, that would come later, but in every way that mattered. The moment he walked into that room, Robert McKinnon ceased to exist as anything more than a pawn in Bumpy Johnson's game. The year was 1955. Eisenhower was president. The Cold War was heating up, and in the smoke-filled back rooms of New York City, the FBI was getting desperate, because the Italian Mafia wasn't just running numbers and smuggling liquor anymore. They were trafficking heroin, millions of dollars worth, flowing through the ports, through the neighborhoods, through the veins of America, and the feds couldn't touch them. Every time they got close, witnesses disappeared, evidence vanished, judges ruled in favor of men who shouldn't have had a chance in hell. The 5 families had bought so much protection, they might as well have been running the Justice Department themselves. That's when someone in a Washington office had a very dangerous idea: fight fire with fire, use one criminal to catch another, find someone the Italians feared, someone with his own army, someone with nothing to lose, find Bumpy Johnson. But what they didn't understand, what they couldn't understand, was that Bumpy Johnson had been waiting for them to come. He'd been watching the feds struggle against the Italians for months, watching them fail, watching them get more desperate. And desperation, Bumpy knew, was opportunity. The meeting had been McKinnon's idea. Neutral ground, he'd said, somewhere public enough to feel safe, private enough to speak freely. The Lexington Hotel wasn't neutral ground, it was Bumpy's ground, had been for 15 years. The manager, the bellhops, the desk clerks, they all knew exactly who paid for their children's education. McKinnon arrived first, 7:30 p.m. sharp. Federal agents were always punctual. It was a weakness Bumpy had noticed years ago. They followed rules, even when the rules got them killed. The agent was younger than Bumpy expected, maybe 35, with that clean-shaven regulation haircut look that screamed law enforcement from 3 blocks away. He wore a gray suit that cost more than most people made in a month. Government salary didn't pay for clothes like that, which meant McKinnon had other sources of income, which meant he was either corrupt or he came from money. Either way, it made him useful. Bumpy entered the room at exactly 8 p.m., not 7:59, not 8:01. Punctuality was respect, and respect was power. He wore his signature dark suit, perfectly pressed, with a white pocket square that caught the lamplight. No jewelry except a simple gold watch, no weapons that McKinnon could see. But then again, McKinnon wasn't looking in the right places. The third man was already there, sitting in the corner chair like he'd grown from the upholstery. Vincent "Vinny" Chains Torino, underboss of the Genovese family, 60 years old, with hands that had strangled more men than McKinnon had arrested. Vinny wasn't supposed to be there. His presence changed everything, because if the Italians knew about this meeting, it meant they were either very confident or very scared. Bumpy took his seat slowly, studying both men. McKinnon was nervous, sweat beading at his temples despite the cool October air. Vinny was calm, but his eyes never stopped moving, scanning the room, the windows, the door, professional paranoia, the kind that kept men alive in their business. "Mr. Johnson," McKinnon began, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." Bumpy didn't respond immediately. He reached into his jacket, slowly, so neither man would panic, and pulled out a cigar. Cuban, pre-embargo, the kind of luxury that reminded everyone in the room exactly what kind of money he controlled. "Agent McKinnon," Bumpy said finally, lighting the cigar with a silver Zippo. "You wanted to discuss business, so let's discuss business." McKinnon opened his folder. Inside were photographs, documents, surveillance reports, the complete file on the Genovese family's heroin operation. Names, dates, locations, Everything the FBI had spent 3 years trying to prove. "We know you've been losing territory to the Italians," McKinnon said, sliding a photograph across the table. It showed Bumpy's old policy bank on 135th Street, now flying Genovese colors. "They're moving into Harlem, taking your customers, taking your money, taking your respect." Bumpy studied the photograph without expression, but underneath the table, his left hand rested on another photograph, one that McKinnon couldn't see, one that would change everything. "And," Bumpy asked, "and we can help you get it back," McKinnon continued. "Full federal protection for your operations, immunity for your organization, and guaranteed arrest warrants for every Italian soldier who sets foot in Harlem." Vinnie Chains leaned forward for the first time. "That's a generous offer, Agent. Almost too generous. Makes a man wonder what the catch is." McKinnon's jaw tightened. "The catch, Mr. Torino, is that your family's heroin operation ends permanently. Mr. Johnson helps us identify your suppliers, your distribution network, your protection. In return, he gets Harlem back." The room fell silent. The only sound was the distant traffic, 12 floors below, and the soft hiss of Bumpy's cigar. 3 men, each representing forces that could destroy the others, each knowing that only one would walk out of this room with what they came for. Bumpy took a long drag from his cigar, then set it carefully in the crystal ashtray. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, almost conversational, but every word carried the weight of 30 years in the streets. "Agent McKinnon, you made a mistake tonight. Actually, you made several mistakes, but the biggest one was assuming I didn't already know about this meeting." McKinnon's face went pale. "What are you talking about?" Instead of answering, Bumpy placed his own photograph on the table. It was grainy, taken with a telephoto lens, but clear enough. It showed Agent McKinnon shaking hands with Frank Costello outside a restaurant in Little Italy 2 weeks ago. "You see, Agent," Bumpy continued, "while you were planning to use me against the Italians were planning to use you against me. Mr. Torino here isn't representing the Genovese family tonight. He's representing the FBI. Just like you're not really representing the FBI. You're representing Frank Costello." McKinnon's hand moved toward his jacket, but Vinnie was faster. The gun appeared in his hand like magic, pointed directly at the agent's chest. "I wouldn't," Vinnie said quietly. "Not unless you want to find out how many floors a man can fall before he stops bouncing." Bumpy smiled. Not the friendly smile of a businessman. The cold smile of a predator who just watched his prey walk into a perfectly laid trap. "Here's what really happened, Agent McKinnon. 3 months ago, Frank Costello approached you. Not officially, of course. Through intermediaries. Clean hands, plausible deniability. He offered you something the FBI couldn't, something you needed very badly." McKinnon said nothing, but his breathing was getting shallow. "Money, perhaps, to pay off those gambling debts your wife doesn't know about? Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe he just offered you information, inside knowledge about organized crime that would make your career, help you climb the ladder, get you out of the field and into a nice, safe office in Washington." Bumpy stood up, walked to the window. 12 floors down. New York City glittered like a circuit board. All those lights representing lives, businesses, dreams. And from up here, it all looked so small, so manageable. "The plan was elegant," Bumpy continued. "Costello gives you intelligence on the Genovese family, real intelligence, names, dates, evidence that would stick in court. You use that intelligence to build a case, but you need an informant, someone with credibility, someone the courts would believe." He turned back to face the room. "That's where I come in. You approach me with this offer, federal protection in exchange for testimony against the Genoveses. I agree, because what choice do I have? The feds are breathing down my neck. The Italians are moving into my territory. It's cooperate or go to prison." McKinnon found his voice. You're making this up, am I?" Bumpy reached into his jacket again. This time he pulled out a cassette recorder, small, compact, state-of-the-art. "Because I have recordings, Agent, very clear recordings, of you and Frank Costello's nephew discussing payment schedules, of you and Vinnie here planning tonight's performance, of you practicing your lines in the bathroom mirror this morning, The blood drained from McKinnon's face. That's impossible. We swept for bugs. We checked everything. Bumpy laughed, a genuine, delighted laugh. Agent McKinnon, you checked for government bugs, FBI bugs, police bugs. You didn't check for my bugs, because you assumed I was just another street criminal, too stupid to own the kind of surveillance equipment that your people use. Vinny shifted uncomfortably in his chair, because now he was realizing that if Bumpy had been watching McKinnon, he might have been watching him too. Here's what happens next, Bumpy said, sitting back down. Agent McKinnon, you're going to return to your superiors and tell them that I refused your offer, that I'm too proud, too stubborn, too loyal to my organization to turn informant. They'll believe it, because it's exactly what they expect to hear. McKinnon opened his mouth to protest, but Bumpy held up a hand. Vinny, you're going to report to Frank Costello that the FBI operation failed, that McKinnon couldn't deliver me, that I'm still a threat that needs to be handled through traditional means. He'll believe it, because it confirms what he already thinks about federal competence. Both men stared at him, neither understanding where this was going. But here's the beautiful part, Bumpy said, relighting his cigar. What you don't know, what neither of your bosses knows, is that I've already made my own deal with the Justice Department, directly, bypassing the FBI entirely. The silence that followed was complete. Even the traffic noise seemed to fade. You see, gentlemen, while you were all playing your little games, I was talking to people who actually matter. Federal prosecutors, Treasury investigators, people who care less about interdepartmental politics and more about results. Bumpy opened his own folder. Inside were documents that made McKinnon's file look like a grocery list. Bank records, wire transfers, shipping manifests, a complete breakdown of the Italian mob's heroin network. Not just the Genoveses, all 5 families. I've been building this case for 8 months, Bumpy continued. Not as an informant, as a partner. The Justice Department provides me with federal protection. I provide them with everything they need to dismantle organized crime in New York. Vinny's gun was shaking now. You're lying. You wouldn't dare cross the families. They'd hunt you to the ends of the earth. Would they, Bumpy asked? Because according to these documents, the families are about to be very busy with their own problems. Federal raids, simultaneous arrests, frozen assets, starting tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. McKinnon finally found his voice. This is insane. You can't take on the entire mob, and the FBI will never let you operate freely. We'll arrest you ourselves. Bumpy smiled that cold smile again. Agent McKinnon, you seem to be operating under the impression that you still have choices. You don't, because those recordings I mentioned, they're not just of you and Costello's people. They're of you, specifically. The cassette recorder clicked on. McKinnon's own voice filled the room. I can deliver, Bumpy Johnson, but I want $50,000 up front and another $50,000 when the job's done. And I want Costello's guarantee that my gambling markers disappear. McKinnon's face went ashen. Where did you get that? Your hotel room, Bumpy said simply. 3 nights ago, when you were rehearsing your pitch to the Italians. Very thorough preparation, by the way. I was impressed. The agent's hand moved toward his gun again, but this time he stopped himself, because he was finally understanding the position he was in. Caught between the FBI, the mob, and Bumpy Johnson, with evidence of his corruption on tape. Here's your new reality, Agent, Bumpy continued. You're going to resign from the FBI, quietly. A family emergency, perhaps. Health problems. Something that doesn't raise questions. Then you're going to disappear. New city, new name, new life. Because if you stay in New York, either the mob will kill you for failing them, or the FBI will arrest you for corruption, or I'll destroy you just for wasting my time. McKinnon was sweating freely now. And if I refuse, then tomorrow's headlines will be very interesting reading, Bumpy said. Federal agent caught taking mob money. I think the photographs of you counting cash in Costello's restaurant will be particularly compelling. Vinny Chains was calculating his own odds. The gun in his hand suddenly felt very heavy, because he was beginning to understand that he wasn't holding a weapon. He was holding evidence that would link him directly to corruption of federal officials. As for you, Vinny, Bumpy said, turning his attention to the underboss. "You have a simple choice. You can pull that trigger, kill me and Agent McKinnon, and try to fight your way out of this hotel, which won't work, by the way, because there are federal agents in the lobby, on the stairwells, and on the roof, all waiting for my signal." Vinny's eyes flicked toward the door, then back to Bumpy. "Or," Bumpy continued, "you can put the gun down, walk out of here, and deliver a message to Frank Costello. Tell him that Bumpy Johnson sends his regards, and tell him that the game is over." For 30 seconds, nobody moved. 3 men in a room, each holding pieces of a puzzle that could destroy all of them. The choice of who lived and who died hanging in the balance. Then Vinny slowly placed his gun on the table. "Smart man," Bumpy said. He stood up, straightened his tie, and walked toward the door. "Gentlemen, it's been educational. Agent McKinnon, you have 24 hours to clean out your desk. Vinny, give my best to Frank. Tell him I said checkmate." At the door, Bumpy paused. "Oh, and one more thing. That federal protection I mentioned? It's real. As of midnight tonight, Harlem is officially under Justice Department oversight. Any Italian soldier who crosses 110th Street will be arrested on federal charges. The neighborhood is mine again, legally this time." The door closed behind him with a soft click. Agent McKinnon resigned from the FBI the following morning. He moved to Phoenix, changed his name to Robert Mitchell, and spent the rest of his life selling insurance. He never spoke about what happened in room 1247. Vinny Chains Torino delivered Bumpy's message to Frank Costello that night. Costello's response was unprintable, but he understood the situation. The Italians pulled out of Harlem within a week. The federal raids began exactly as promised. By Christmas of 1955, more than 200 mobsters were behind bars. The heroin network was destroyed. The Five Families' power was broken, not by bullets or bombs, but by ledgers and wire transfers and the kind of evidence that stands up in federal court. Bumpy Johnson never testified in any of those trials. He didn't need to. The documentation he'd provided was so complete, so detailed, that prosecutors barely needed witnesses, just accountants. For the next 13 years, until his death in 1968, Bumpy Johnson operated in Harlem under federal protection, not as an informant, not as a criminal, but as something entirely new, a partner in a system that had decided cooperation was more profitable than conflict. The meeting in room 1247 was never recorded in any official FBI file. The Justice Department classified all related documents. Agent McKinnon's resignation was attributed to family health issues. Vinny Torino's report to Costello was that the federal operation had failed due to poor planning. But in the back rooms and dark corners where real power is negotiated, the story became legend. The night Bumpy Johnson walked into a room with the FBI and the Italian mob, and walked out owning them both. Because real power isn't about who has the biggest gun or the most money. It's about who understands the game well enough to change the rules. And on October 15th, 1955, in a hotel room, 12 floors above the streets of Manhattan, Bumpy Johnson proved that he didn't just play the game, he was the game. Some said he got lucky, others said he was just smarter than everyone else. But those who knew Bumpy Johnson understood the truth. Luck doesn't plan 8 months in advance. Luck doesn't record conversations and photograph secret meetings. Luck doesn't build federal cases while playing 3 different sides against each other. That wasn't luck, that was art. The art of power, the art of survival, the art of turning your enemies into unwilling allies and your problems into profit. Bumpy Johnson had mastered them all, and in room 1247 of the Lexington Hotel, he gave a masterclass in how a true king operates, not through force, not through fear, but through intelligence, patience, and the absolute certainty that everyone else in the room was playing checkers while he was playing chess. Agent McKinnon thought he was offering Bumpy 3 choices, but Bumpy Johnson had already chosen. He'd chosen to win, and in his world, winning wasn't negotiable. It was inevitable. The photograph under the table was just the opening move. The rest was pure artistry.